Hey, this is Keith from Save the Rust. So we finished up on our 1942 Harley yesterday, the blue one, and today we're going to work on this 1942 that I built about a year and a half ago for a friend of mine. Last summer, we went to start it, and even though it had a rebuilt transmission, it was skipping, and that's when we stopped. My buddy brought over a few more transmissions that we'll just pull out this one and probably send it back to the builder, and then we'll just pop in one of his extra transmissions. So follow along, and we'll try and explain it as we go, what we're going to do and how to take a transmission out of a Harley 45 and replace it with another one. So with removing one of these transmissions, one of the first things you got to do is pull the primary off. And we'll start with that. Let's take off the bolt that holds the primary. There's really only one in the center, and then there's one in the back here. The one in the back has a little spring on it, just to hold it in position. I'm guessing they probably learned that if it was all rigid mounted and cracked. It's usually why you put a spring in between the nut and the primary. So we've got a 1/4 inch bolt, little spring, washer, nut. So in order to get the primary off, we've got to loosen up the front floorboard mount. And then the mount that holds the floorboard strap on. So we loosen off these nuts, and the strap will just pull out, just give enough room to get the primary off. So what we'll do now is we'll start loosening off the transmission from underneath. There's 3 bolts. I think they're all 7/8 and 3/4. Hard to remember. 3/4. So we got the 2 bolts that hold the primary out, which look like this, and that's with the lock washer. The lock washer tab goes into the primary, and then you fold it over into the slots. And then we got the 3 bolts that hold the transmission. You can see here, still gotta get this washer off. There's the 2 bolts, the three studs that we took the nuts off of. I gotta get my terminology right sometimes. Whatever. So now we'll pull the primary off. We're gonna pull the clutch off. Primary. Terminology today is not cohesive in my brain. Whatever, you get it. So anyway, we're gonna pull these 3 nuts off with the lock tabs. Pull that off, then the clutch plates come off, then the clutch drum comes off, and then we'll pull off the primary chain, blah, blah, blah. And then that'll all come off, and then we can start on the opposite side. We'll have to pull the kicker off. We'll have to pull the clutch arm off, because I don't think I can squeeze that underneath the battery box, so we have to pull the transmission from this side to the opposite side to get it out. Pull off the chain and the adjuster, which is back here, and then we have to pull the chain guard off because it mounts to the outer sprocket cover clutch mount. And that should be it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the clutch adjuster nut and screw out. Just do this. So by inserting a washer that goes onto this retainer, and then putting some tension back on it, and then we can take these lock tabs off. What that does is allow us to pull these nuts off. Jesus. There's a lock tab. So you can see it goes into that little slot, and you fold it over. Put those to the side. Hung up a little bit on the studs, so you can see by putting that washers and the nut back on holds the springs in place. Otherwise, when I pop this off, all the springs would come out. It's a bit of a pain to get them out. So we'll pull the clutches out. Clutch hub comes off. Get the primary chain off. And we'll just leave it all together so we know what direction the chain goes on. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull off this nut for the chain guard, pull off this bolt and nut off the kicker, and then this bolt with the lock washer, lock washer that holds the clutch to get the clutch arm on. So that's the next. So we built this bike for a friend of ours who just wanted a rider. He's got a couple of 45s in pieces. He's collected over the last 20 years. Had a 45 back in the day, back in the 80s, 90s, and then sold it, and I believe he bought it back, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the original frame is we're using it on this build. So there is a video on it, so check it out. There's a kicker. If I was going to say where there's a weak spot on a Harley 45 transmission, it's that they use, they threaded in this arm, the shaft, and it's only got a few threads on it. And I've seen them get stripped in the past because there's so few threads, and you're trying to tighten up this large nut and it kind of gets messed up. There's also two versions of this. Can't remember exact years, but I think the later ones, this is a later arm because it has a hole here. Or is this the early one? Anyway, there's two versions. One of them uses this style of lock tab, whatever you want to call it. And the other one actually goes around the entire nut, and then you screw it in and holds it in place. I had one of these actually fall out on my blue bike, and I was out riding one day, and even with one side still holding, it still made it home. So you can see very little amount of thread there. There's your lock tab. Let's put it here so you can see it. So it goes into this hole, that's what locks it, and they fold it over. So when we built this bike, we just kind of used whatever he had lying around, but what he had lying around was a completely rebuilt motor and transmission. And there's a couple of things we gotta still do. I gotta make a mount that holds up the rear of the muffler. For some reason, the muffler clamp package we bought, these are like an inch too short, so I'm not really sure. I mean, it's the right diameter for the muffler, and it's for a 45. So I'm not sure if the originals kick up a little higher, which allows this bracket to bolt into this point, but whatever, that's typical aftermarket stuff. It's close to fitting sometimes. Sometimes it's not, doesn't fit at all. Sometimes it fits. You're kind of taking a chance whenever you're buying some of that stuff. So here's a little thing too. So this is your clutch arm, okay? This hole here, that was originally put in there for 1942 Harley WLCs, the Canadian version, because this is where the cable went for the hand clutch, optional hand clutch. So hand clutch came out in 42 on a Canadian model. Most people think it came out in 52 when the Panhead introduced a foot shift hand clutch, but in reality it was 10 years earlier on the Harley 45 for the Canadian models. So that's all the pieces we have to really remove. What we'll do is we'll just loosen this up or see if we can move this back. Pull it right off even. There you go. Then we gotta remove the chain, and then let's see if we can get this lifted out. So before we lift the transmission out, we're gonna have to pull the battery box out. So I took all the bolts out and just need a bit more clearance room. So decided I'm just gonna pull the inner primary off, make everything that much easier to get off. So we use a clutch hub nut tool socket to remove it. I first got to use this tool to hold the clutch hub in position, and then a lot easier to do this when you have all these tools. Now we can pull that tranny out. All right, finally, let's get this transmission out. There. All right. We got the transmission out. Let's put the other one in. All right, so thanks to my little buddy helper, Waylon, we got the other transmission in, and time to reassemble. I, for some reason, thought the transmission came out this side when it actually went out that side. It's been a while since I've taken a transmission in and out without taking the rear fender off, you know, so just can't remember everything. Stay tuned for part 2, where we put everything back together. See you soon.